What we're going to talk about today is anger from a psychological and social perspective. We are going to talk about how kids experience their emotions, what happens in interpreting emotions and then reacting to emotions, like some pieces to think about along that journey, why anger is so powerful. And we're going to go through some experiential and playful learning tools to help kids explore anger in different ways and practice emotional regulation as well. To start, I want to start with this statement of, you're feeling angry, just calm down, just take a deep breath, just handle it differently, right? Which is something I think a lot of our kids hear when they feel really angry, when they are expressing that anger in an outward way. And we know, like, probably doesn't work. Like, this doesn't touch them. This isn't effective necessarily. They can't do anything with this. I have a number of questions I would usually, if we were in person, I would ask you, but since we're not, we're going to do a little poll. These are, let me just set this up. Okay, I'm going to launch this poll. It is a series of 5 questions that I would like you to answer. They're very quick, very simple, and then we're going to take 3 minutes, and then we're going to come back to it and look at the results. And this will really set the stage for who's here, what your concerns are, and what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so let's take a look at what our answers were. So in these questions, we're trying to get a picture of how kids experience their anger, how they feel about their anger, what happens with their anger, like how do they express it. So it looks like, so this first question, my child feels angry often and or intensely. 3/4 of the group are saying yes, like that resonates for my child. A number of people saying sometimes that makes sense for us. But so what we're seeing here is like anger, kids experiencing and feeling angry often or intensely. Kids having big behavioral reactions or verbal reactions when angry. Most of you said yes to that question. A few sometimes. My child struggles to use or apply coping skills when upset. Most people are saying yes to that. There's good reason for that, or I'd say valid reason for that, and we're going to talk about that today. My child struggles with their self-esteem, feels badly after they've reacted out of anger. Okay, we have a little bit more variety there. Yes, for about half of you, sometimes, and some kids, no, that's not the case. And then this question of like kids feeling out of control, like they can't have control in moments when they're feeling angry. They feel like the anger is beyond them, out of their control. So yes, and sometimes to that question. So that is really, close that out. That is really important, I think, because these are all the things we're going to talk about, and it kind of speaks to just how powerful anger is. So this whole presentation is going to be about kids for the most part. But I want to take a moment to, as we're talking about how powerful emotions are, how powerful anger is for kids, I also want to make note of how powerful it is to watch your child struggling with something, whether it's anger or whether it's something else, the emotional component, the weight of that for parents. At Mightier, I've worked with a lot of parents who are talking about their own struggles in relation to their child's, right? So like it is clear that that line, that boundary between your emotional state and your child is very blurry. I want to play this clip. This is from one of our Mightier families. Her just talking about her child, but also I want you to listen to her voice. And I think this will resonate with a lot of folks here. Oh, hold on.
Right now, we're trying everything. It's really difficult to find a therapist. There's 6-month waiting list. I just worry mostly about just her emotional state. She can tell you what her coping skills are, but when she's in these moments, she'll start crying and screaming things like, I want to die, I don't want to be here. It definitely impacts every area of our life. You know, all day I'm just thinking about, is she going to be able to make it through the day and get home off that bus? It's just that. Now I'm crying. It's just hard to see. All I care about is that she's happy.
So in this, I think I want to call it a few things. Like one, you can hear the emotion in Ashley's voice. Ashley is the mother in this. Also, there is what she's describing is her daughter having a really difficult time with her emotions, feeling that she doesn't have control. She can't remember coping skills. She can't use coping skills. And it's really overpowering and overwhelming. So this is just like a very relatable thing. Anger is big, anger is powerful, anger is very hard. So now let's talk about where anger comes from for kids. So where we're going to start is, actually, before we even talk about this, I think a lot of people have probably seen like the anger iceberg, right? Which is like anger is above the surface. And then what are all the emotions underneath the surface? What are all like the different emotions like frustration or embarrassment or grief that can like pile in and add up to what we think of as anger? And that is a really important model, like a really helpful way of thinking about anger. But I want to look at anger from a psychological and a social development lens. So I want us to like look through based on how old a child is and what is important to their development, what they're focused on, what they are learning, like what they're navigating, and how that then layers into their developing self-image, their core beliefs about themselves, the world around them, relationships, and what can happen when kids have a tough, like something interrupts that developmental stage, what that internal conflict can be, or there's a phrase for this in psychology, something being ego dystonic, which is basically the idea that like, I see myself in a certain way. And when I either act in a way that doesn't line up with that, or someone implies that like, I am not the way I see myself, that doesn't sit right. That doesn't feel good. And anger can spin out of that, right? So this last column is really going to be a lot about things that can lead to that sort of feeling of like, this doesn't fit with who I want to be and how I see myself. And that doesn't feel good out like that. And like anger can spiral out of that. So let's start with the first row. This model is actually a very old model. It's from like the 1950s, but it doesn't capture a lot of other things we're going to talk about today, but it is a really helpful starting point for these things. We are going to start with the first year of life, which I know no one is here because they have a 7-month-old who is expressing anger, right? Like that's not the group here today, but I think that it is helpful to, in looking back, you'll be able to say, oh yeah, I understand how this works. So you think back to the first year of your child's life, everything was about trust and safety and getting their basic needs met, right? Your child would cry when they were cold, they were hungry, they were uncomfortable. You weren't there, right? At a certain point, they realize they can't see you, and that scares them, right? So it's a lot about basic needs and safety, and getting your needs met is really the goal. And from there, a child is learning. So think about self-image and core beliefs. A child is learning like, I am worthy of love. People care about me. I am safe. I can trust others. Specifically, I can trust my caregiver. When that is interrupted, when those basic needs around like your survival needs or your safety needs are not met, you start learning something else, right? People cannot be trusted. I am not worthy of love. The world is not a safe place. So if you think about kids who struggle with like attachment issues and or maybe didn't have those like secure attachments in that first year, understanding your like safety in relationships is really hard, really challenging. And so that can lead to feelings of insecurity, feelings of anxiety. It can be really uncomfortable in relationships. So then if we jump to the next year, which again, also is going to be a little too young for the kids we're probably talking about here. But if we talk about the toddler years, really like 2 to 3 years old, it's a lot about autonomy, right? I'm my own person. People talk about terrible twos, but like, and it's a lot about like, I can do things for myself. What are my boundaries? What are the limits here? Let me test all that. Let me explore, which is developmentally really appropriate. And for parents, it's really hard because kids don't know safety at that age, right? But it is really developmentally appropriate that kids can explore that and sort of figure out what they can do for themselves, feel confident, build that confidence, begin to understand and trust different boundaries. Like, what are my body's boundaries? What are my physical boundaries? If I climb on this thing, what happens? What happens in my environment when I act in a certain way? What happens when I act, what does my mom do when I act a certain way, right? So this is all like important for a child's development in general, and their self-image and their core beliefs, and like feeling like they're their own person, they can do things. When that is interrupted, right? So when kids are not given like that opportunity or space to make that exploration, or it's overly controlled, it can kind of spiral in a couple of different ways, where either it's scary to try new things, I don't know the boundaries between myself and others, or this feeling of anger, like I should be allowed to do more. This doesn't feel good that I'm not allowed to do more. And so I'm angry about that. It's sort of at like a core level. Now let's get to play age. So like 4 to 6 years old. So this is a lot about like initiative, like taking the lead. Kids are really exploring and discovering here, like I'm my own person with my own ideas. A lot of this happens through play, like creative and imaginative play. Kids are like figuring out power and control, their level of power and control over different situations, what they can create, what happens. If there's a social element to their play, they're like navigating that part with another person, who takes the lead and when, and learning a lot about creative problem solving. So exploration, again, all of this boils down to like exploration of these things is really important for kids. And when they are not given that opportunity to explore, or they receive some sort of messaging that sort of implies like, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. Or for these later stages, like you're not good at that, that can start to turn into something else for kids, something that feel like an internal conflict or something negative. So what could happen here is kids feeling like my ideas are not valuable, I have to follow other people. Or again, this feeling of like, this doesn't feel good, I'm capable of more than the opportunities I'm given. And so again, this feeling of anger that can like, it's kind of like a raw emotion in that moment. Like I should be doing more, I want to be doing more. And that can be expressed as anger. Next row here, school age, 7 to 12 years old. This is a lot about like industry, which is effort, hard work, putting in the effort and hard work and being good at something, getting the return on that. So it's a lot about competence and mastery. Like I want to put in the work and feel like I am good at something, like I earned this. Also discovering my own interests, and my own interests are valid and important. And really there are things that I'm good at. And so, and this is a lot of like the elementary school years, right? When kids might be struggling academically, right? Or might be struggling socially in school. So this is a really interesting stage, because there are a lot of other factors that are not, they're not in your immediate control as a parent at home with your child, right? There are a lot of other people at play in your child's life at this point, who can also kind of be sending messages around like your child that influence like that feeling of competence and mastery for your child, or what they are or are not good at. And the piece that can come out here, this internal conflict, like egodystonic feeling, is, well, I'm not good at things. Like people are saying I'm not good at things, or my interests aren't important, other people don't care about my interests, or people think I'm bad. This, I think, is really applicable for kids who struggle with their behavioral reactions to their emotions, and the reaction is not okay, but kids kind of taking that as like, that means I'm wrong, I'm bad. That's not a good feeling. No one wants to think of themselves in that way. Again, anger can spiral out of this. And then the last stage, there are more stages here, but they go into like adulthood. The last stage is adolescence, 13 to 18 years old. So really like identity and belonging. Having the space to kind of figure out, okay, who am I? I know myself. I understand my identity. I know who I want to be. I know how I want to be, how I want to act. I also feel like I have a place and a sense of belonging in this world or this community or in this social group. For kids who are adolescents who are still struggling with that or don't figure that out, it can lead to this feeling of like, I don't know myself, which when you look at teens, like sometimes you see, let me follow others. Other people can decide who I am, or I base who I am on how other people treat me or how other people tell me who I am, which is really hard, or I feel out of place. So again, like we can see, especially in these years, we can see like depression coming out of this, or anger, or anxiety, right? So a number of different emotional states coming out of this. So the reason I go through this chart is just as you think about your child's age and sort of like developmental stage, it's just an interesting way to think about like, all right, what is important to their learning, their psychological and social learning and development at this point? And is their anger somehow tied to that? All right, next we're going to talk about how emotions just aren't just emotions. This is mainly going to be important when we get to like the intervention piece of this. So this triangle, if anyone has seen it before, comes from like cognitive behavioral therapy. And it is just, I like this triangle a lot because it clearly shows the connection between our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors, and that they all impact one another. So the examples I like to give are, when we are feeling happy, we are more likely energetic, might be out doing things, moving, talking with people, we might be more social, and we probably have more positive, hopeful thoughts running through our head. We might be making plans. When we are feeling sad, it's kind of the opposite, right? We are low energy. We are more likely to be lounging around, you might be on the couch, laying in bed, and our thoughts tend to be more negative, more pessimistic, more hopeless. So all of those things are connected. We can clearly see how it comes through for anger as well, right? Like when kids are feeling angry, we might see that reflected in their behavior, right? So based on the child, like, do they shut down? Do they yell? Do they get aggressive? Do they have an outburst? Like, what does that look like behaviorally for them? And their thoughts. Do they have tunnel vision? Are they absolutely intently focused on the thing that is making them angry or the person that is making them angry? Is their thinking inflexible? Are they not able to shift or think differently about the situation? Right, so it's all connected. Now, the reason I want to point this out is because we can't just go at emotions. We can't just, when we're sad, we can't just say, be happy now. When we're angry, we can't just say, feel better now, feel calmer now, right? We can't just like flip a switch and change how we feel emotionally. We have to go at it through thoughts and through behaviors. Like those are our access points. So we will later in this talk get at some behavioral interventions and some like cognitive interventions, some like thought-based ways to shift our emotional state. This slide has a lot on it. We're going to go through it slowly. This is another, everything we're doing right now is sort of like first understanding like the psychological and social lens for thinking about anger, thinking about development, and how it's tied to expression, like why kids might be feeling angry, that connection between thoughts and behaviors and emotions. Now let's think about the impact of emotional state and cognitive skills on how you interpret and experience your emotions, and then how you react to them. This is all just groundwork stuff that we're going through right now. So if we just look along the top at the blue boxes, this would seemingly be a very simple model. Some triggering event happens, a threat to our safety, a threat to our ego. If we go back to that other slide where like our sense of self is being challenged in some way, or we have some disappointment, something goes as like unplanned or unexpected. There could be a lot of different types of triggering events, right? But a few examples there. So that happens. Next, we judge the situation in some way. We have some like appraisal of it, largely like it's fine, it's okay, it's not okay, this is not okay. I should do whatever. I should go for a walk. I should use a coping skill. I should talk to someone. Then we have a behavioral response, right? Do we need to use a coping skill? Do we do that? Do we communicate something? What do we communicate? How do we communicate? Do we have some verbal or physical response? Do we do nothing? Like what is our response in that situation, right? So 1, 2, 3. It is not as simple as that though. And I think one way, let's go through an example. We have all been in the situation where we've been cut off in traffic before, and how each of us respond when cut off in traffic depends on who each of us are, depends on probably the day, because how I might respond on Monday might be very different than how I respond on Saturday. based off of things going on in my life. Might depend on how much sleep we've gotten. It might depend on other stressors we've experienced that day, right? It depends on a number of different factors. And there's a reason for that. So if we look at, right, one response might be angry right away. That person shouldn't have cut me off. That's ridiculous. You might tailgate them, you might honk, you might like yell out the window, you're angry now about it, right? Another response might be like, whatever, like that person must be in a rush. I'm not worried about it. Doesn't bother me. You continue on your way, right? So different types of reactions that we could all have. Now, let's think about why those reactions, why the emotion we experience might be different and why the reactions might be different. So when a triggering event happens, if our brain and body immediately interpret that as a threat, like threat to our safety, basically, and our fight or flight response is triggered, there's an immediate physiological response, right? Our heart rate increases, our muscles become a little more tense, our breathing becomes a little more shallow, our cognitive abilities are impaired, right? So if we are bumped into that fight or flight mode where our body and brain are saying like, we need to prep for action, we need to prep for response, that is what's happening. And there's no time for clear thinking or rational problem solving or decision making necessarily. So that's a really important factor. We're going to come back to that multiple times, especially when it comes to emotional regulation and how kids choose to respond when angry. It's very important to keep track of the fact that when we are angry, we have less, our brain is working a little differently in those moments. So say that has happened, right? So that is directly impacting our judgment of the situation, how we can think about it. And it is directly impacting like our problem solving abilities and how we're going to respond. Next, if we think about this middle column, I guess, and how we judge and appraise a situation, we have to think about a number of factors like what is this, so say it's you, say it's your child, say it's some person, what is this person's specific frustration tolerance in general or in this moment? What are their cognitive skills like flexible thinking and perspective taking, right? So if we also think specifically about children with ADHD or autistic children who maybe are going to struggle a little more with this skill anyways, based on how their brain works, that's really important because it's going to directly impact how they can how they interpret a situation. It also is going to depend on pre-event state. So like, did you get enough sleep last night? What is your emotional capacity in general at that moment, based on other factors? And then if we get to this last one, behavioral response, again, the skill piece is really important. So again, pulling in, let's think about ADHD, let's think about autism, let's think about diagnoses that directly impact the brain in some way. What are your problem solving abilities? How clear thinking are you in that moment based off of how emotionally charged you're feeling? What is your ability to predict and think through long-term goals and consequences of your behavior? What is your impulse control, right? So these things directly impact how kids are going to respond. And it's a lot about skills. It's a lot about just boils down to abilities and how the brain and body work. So what happens internally when we feel angry? So what we have right here is a little body map. If anyone has ever done one of these with their kids, it's a very simple, I don't know how fun or how engaging this is for kids, but it's a very simple model of just kind of honing in on how does an emotion feel in my body, right? Because we experience emotions in our body first in a lot of ways, and actually cueing into that physiological experience of those body cues is the first layer of building emotional awareness, helping kids build emotional awareness. So how you would do this with a child would more be okay, let's think about anger. How would you describe or draw what's going on with your heart rate when you're angry? How does your stomach feel? What's going on with your hands? How does your face feel? What's your temperature like? Things like that, cueing kids into how an emotion feels in their body and specifically in different body parts. This is, I think, an exercise that some kids could do, and some kids are no, I have no interest in that. it is one of the resources like worksheets I'll send out afterwards for the kids who could engage in something like this, because it can be helpful in sort of picking up early on, like, okay, I feel this cue from my body. Let me understand how I'm feeling. All right, so now let's talk a little more specifically about anger and how it feels. This clip is from one of our Mightier players, and they're just describing what anger feels like in their body. So let me play this.
Hot or like powerful, and like get all red. And you're not thinking clearly, I think. And like you don't go through, like you don't think about what's happening, you just do stuff. Like you don't think things through before you do it like you would usually do. Like you don't think twice before pushing your brother back or something like that. You get shaky, you're sweating, you feel gross, stomach hurts. You feel like you're gonna throw up, or like your voice gets shaky and you're like, I don't know. Yeah.
You can hear in this child's voice them talking about how anger feels, how powerful and overpowering it feels in their body. They also call out, like, you don't think clearly, you don't think twice before pushing your brother back. Like, they just feel this combination of powerful and powerless in this moment of feeling anger, which I think is how a lot of kids are going to experience anger. And it's a very powerful emotion. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so everything we've just talked about and looked at, especially when it comes to you are feeling an intense emotion, anger for our purposes here today, and you need to either choose how to respond or you need to calm down. Everything that we've looked at kind of suggests so far that it's not necessarily a choice. It's not necessarily something you have control over in that moment. Our abilities shift in that moment of feeling intense emotions. So that is really important to understand, because it is not the model that we work off of in many therapeutic settings. In a lot of therapeutic settings, we treat emotional regulation, calming strategies, coping skills as choices, as abilities kids can learn and do and then translate out into real life. But it's really important to understand, like, what is happening in our brain and body when we are emotionally dysregulated, and therefore what our abilities are in terms of getting back to that state of regulation, back to that state of feeling calm enough to think clearly and make choices about how we would like to respond. So we have to think about two parts to this. One is that intentional cognitive side of understanding our emotions and what we should do with them, and where they come from. So this is a lot about like recognizing emotions. How do they feel in my body? What does anger feel like in my stomach? How do I name that thing? Remembering calming strategies, right? So I know when I feel angry, I should not react. I should take a break. I should go for a walk before I respond. So choose how to respond, actually do that response, accurately judge a situation, right? So like pick up on all the pieces going on around you, think flexibly about that, take perspective, think clearly, problem solve, communicate clearly. Do you have a need? Do you need to tell someone how you feel? Do you need someone to help you, right? All of these really wonderful skills are what we focus on in a lot of therapeutic settings with kids. And those skills all live in a part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, a part of our brain that works really, really well, or it does its best work when we are feeling calm. And it doesn't work as well when we are feeling escalated and when we are in that like fight or flight mode and kind of prep for response and prep for action, right? So that brings us to, like, we also need to think about the automatic instinctual side of how our brain and body work. This is that fight or flight response, right? This is the fact that we have an immediate physiological response, racing heart, muscles tensed, shallow breathing, that trade-off that happens in our brain where if we were to stop and think long enough and try to like problem solve in that moment and spend time, if we were in a true survival situation, like that slowed us down too much. Like we need to be reactive, right? So that is how we're built to respond in those moments, which is why that part of our brain becomes less accessible to us and doesn't function as well in those moments. So we have the behavioral reactions, right? We just react. If that clip had played, like you would have heard him saying, like, you don't think twice, you just do, you just react. It's not a choice, it's just happening. Now let's layer on top of this. So this is true for all of us, right? Now layer on top a diagnosis like ADHD or autism or a sensory processing disorder or a learning disability that directly impacts how your brain manages certain information or how your brain works in certain ways, right? So specifically for emotional regulation, thinking through goals, long-term goals and consequences of your behavior. If I do this, this will happen to me, or this is or isn't the right choice in how I should behave, right? So being able to like take that step by step, control your impulses, right? Control your immediate emotional response and the reaction that you're kind of like trying to have with that. Think flexibly, take that perspective, interpret sensory information and cues from your body, right? Those are things that are naturally going to be more challenging for a lot of kids, and they're very important for the cognitive, intentional side of emotional regulation. But in typical therapeutic settings, we focus on the intentional cognitive side. We teach kids, we sit down in calm settings with kids and we talk about how do you recognize your emotions? What do they feel like in your body? How do we label those? Let's talk about coping skills. Maybe let's like play around with those a little bit. And then we send kids out into the real world and we expect any of that to translate to moments when they're actually feeling angry or actually feeling overwhelmed or actually feeling anxious and they're in this escalated and heightened emotional state, right? They can't access any of that information that we went through with them in the calm settings, right? Their brain can't do it. And then, so we know how that plays out, right? Kids have the reaction. And it's really hard because, and I hear this a lot from parents, like, but we know, we've done the work. We know the skills. He knows the skills. He knows. And even kids are like, I know, I knew this. I don't know why I acted like that, right? They actually didn't necessarily have that choice in that moment. And this brings me to, I think that work is important. That work is valid. There is for sure a place for that work, but it's not necessarily the full picture. This brings me to, I use the bike metaphor. Talking doesn't always translate. If we were teaching a child how to ride a bike, we would not think about a bike and talk about a bike and talk about balance and then expect a child to get on a bike and then have balance and pedal out into the real world and not fall over, right? Like they would practice riding the bike. They would get on the bike, they would pedal around. It's going to take them a while to develop their sense of balance, but eventually they do, right? Eventually they have balance, they build their reaction times, they know how to navigate around obstacles. They don't have to think about riding the bike anymore, right? Their body knows how to ride the bike. This is how we can think about emotional regulation. This is a different model and a different way to approach teaching kids, helping them learn and build this truly internal ability to regulate their emotions in a way that like their body is responding differently. Their brain is responding a little differently to it. And it's less reliant on like their cognitive abilities and processing in that moment. So I'm going to talk about Mightier here because this is our mechanism. This is our model. It's a biofeedback video game that does this with kids. We've done a number of clinical trials around it. So I'm unabashedly going to talk about it because I think it is really powerful and can be really helpful in helping kids tune into their body and practice emotional regulation in a way that truly builds that skill. So how this works is that, so a biofeedback video game, basically this means kids wear a heart rate monitor as they play. Their heart rate is tied to their gameplay experience. They can see with Mightier, like they can see their heart rate on the screen. So in this little animation, this thing on the side that is now in the center of the screen, that is what we call the gizmo. That is showing you, it's a visual for your heart rate. It is showing you when you're calm and in your blue zone. It is showing you when your heart rate goes up and you go into the red zone. And your gameplay, so you can always have that awareness, right? of what's going on internally with your heart rate. And if you think back to what we talked about, what happens when we experience an intense emotion, our heart rate goes up immediately, right? So our heart rate is directly tied to our emotional state. Now, their gameplay interactions are tied to this as well. So playing a bunch of different games, it's fun and engaging. So it's a different way for kids to like approach this sort of concept. But what happens is as long as they're in their blue zone, the games function normally. And when they get into their red zone, when their heart rate goes up, something changes in the game. This game in particular, it's like you're flying like a spaceship. I think it's harder to like steer when you're in the red zone, right? So something changes in the game. It might be that smoke covers the screen, you can't aim, something different depending on the game. So you want to bring your heart rate down. You want to get back to the blue zone. That is the reward systems are tied to that. So kids are not learning that like, red zone is bad, I failed. They're actually learning like, red zone is the challenge. Let me get back down to blue, let me get back down. And they're learning that they can do that and that they're very good at that. Kids can get back down to the blue zone however they want. There are specific calming and coping strategies that are taught through this: deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, crossing the midline activity, mindful tracing. So a number of different strategies kids can engage with to learn like what works for them. But through this, it's a lot about practice and a lot about repetition. So if you think about any skill that took practice for you to like build muscle memory around, it's the same idea, right? So the more eventually you've practiced so much that it becomes second nature. You don't have to think about it, right? You're kind of changing how your body can automatically respond in those moments. And so the end result is stronger and more natural emotional regulation abilities through this play. And what happens here, if we think about how kids respond, think about emotional regulation in general and sort of how when we are like kicked into that fight or flight mode, like and our heart rate goes up, and now we've lost our ability to think clearly and choose how to respond. If our body has learned and brain have learned a new way, a new regulatory response, and we're able to stay calmer for longer or recover more quickly and more easily, we do now have choice over how we respond in those moments, right? Our brain is able to think about what we should do or what we should say or what's actually happening here, right? Our processing improves. So that's really what's happening, which is like a very different model than like what we do in a lot of like typical therapeutic settings. There's research around this, just specifically to Mightier or like to this mechanism, right? Of like, see your heart rate, have your heart rate connected to a game, bring your heart rate back down over and over and over again. We've done 2 double-blind randomized controlled trials. This was back in 2010. There have been a number of studies since then, but this is really about like that mechanism. This was out of Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. So this gets at emotional regulation at the core of it. Emotional regulation can look different for a lot of kids. There are different emotions that bring you to that point of dysregulation, different ways kids get back to that point of regulation. Very meaningful improvement specifically for symptoms of aggression, oppositional behavior, also a lot of measures around parent stress improving as well in those early trials. And just so to give you a little glimpse of what we think about, what we talk about with that, with aggression, we look at the MOAS, which is the modified overt aggression scale. It really gets at different like types of aggression, layers of aggression, verbal, physical, aggression towards yourself, aggression towards others, posturing, threats. So really saw movement there. A disruptive behavior scale is another one we use. This really gets at like oppositional behaviors, disruptive behaviors, inattention or like distractibility, things like that. Movement there as well, parent stress, family atmosphere. Also some work around schools. So like kids playing this, doing this, engaging with this in schools, and like for kids who were getting removed from the classroom because of their behaviors, that improved. I think the average was, I think they played for about 8 weeks, and for kids who were getting removed from class like 6.2 times a week, that improved to about 2.1 times a week after 8 weeks of play. So in my opinion, like this is helpful for all of us. If I practiced bringing my heart rate down being in tune with my emotions and deep breathing all the time, like I would feel, I would be better off in my life. But it is specifically really helpful for kids who there's a reason that is harder for them. So children who struggle with frustration, anger, irritability, anxiety, outbursts, or who have a diagnosis that makes emotional regulation more challenging. So ODD, DMDD, ADHD, autism, generalized anxiety disorder. But I do think like, I want to bring it back to like this combination, because there's a lot of work that we can do in therapy, or like you can do it at home with your child that like really like builds, we talk about a toolbox, right? Like builds that toolbox, gives them the different tools, ways of thinking about their emotions, ways of thinking about their behaviors, tools to better navigate that. We can do this through play. I'm a really strong believer in like, we can make this stuff playful and engaging for kids. Like that's so much better, because like anger is hard. Talking about anger is hard for kids. Engaging with anger is hard. Anger doesn't feel good for kids. So I think there's a lot of shame sometimes around doing that work. But if we can make it playful, make it engaging, that's really important. But a lot of times what happens because of how our brain and body react when we are emotionally dysregulated is that like we can't access those tools necessarily. So this biofeedback mechanism kind of like opens that toolbox up again. And where I'm going to end today is on recommendations and tools. So there are three main things I'm going to recommend. So first, we didn't talk about parents much at all. I think that's actually a very valuable presentation, webinar topic, just focusing on like parent mental health, parent emotional state, as you're supporting your child and how crucial and important that is. So when you're a parent, there's no time to prioritize your own mental health, your own well-being, but it's important. So however you make time for that, whether that is through a community or a support group, or through your own therapy, or you walk every day, or you make time for yourself, like that is really important. I think we lose ourselves in our children and what our children are struggling with a lot of times. I'm also going to recommend a book that I imagine a lot of people have heard of, The Explosive Child by Dr. Ross Greene. It is a really nice way of thinking about emotions and behaviors from this like skills and abilities perspective. It specifically looks at ODD and ADHD and autism pretty closely, and looks at the brain and like talks about, okay, like based on that diagnosis, this skill is more challenging for this individual, and therefore we need to think about that as we think about their emotions and behaviors. So I think it's a really strong book. Explore emotions and build emotional awareness. This cannot hurt, right? And hopefully we can find playful and engaging ways to do this with children. One thing that I'm going to send out to everyone after this is sort of like a toolkit of like resources for anger. How does anger feel in your body? How can we talk in a playful way about anger? If anger was an animal, what would it be? How do I know other people are feeling angry? What do I wish people understood about me? And then it had some challenges embedded in there as well that get you to like playfully engage with your heart rate, like get your heart rate up on purpose. How do you get your heart rate down? Things like that to get kids to play around with their emotions a little bit in a more physical way. So I'm going to send that out as a PDF as well. And then, I will say, like, I guess this is my unabashed way of saying that biofeedback video games, specifically Mightier, is like a very, very strong way to get kids to practice emotional regulation. So I do think for kids who cannot control their emotions and their reactions to their emotions when they're in those states, it is a new way. It is a different way in. It is a new way in. It's engaging, and it actually gets you to build a skill. So that is all I have for today. I really appreciate you all being here. I see one question coming in. Will we have more information about these tools, how to get it, and instructions for using it? Yeah, so I'm going to send you a number of things. I'm calling like a toolkit of resources, like easily accessed worksheets, games, things like that you can play around with and explore with your child based off of age is going to matter. And if your child is like, no, I will not, I don't want to talk about that, I don't want to play like play a conversation card game with you, totally understandable. What I send you will also have information about Mightier in case that is what you're interested in, and you are looking to like explore more around what our program looks like. Look at our science. We have a lot of science on there. You can see our research. You can also see the other stuff that comes with our program. So these additional games, activities that allow kids to explore their emotions in a more playful way on top of that practice that they are getting through their gameplay. Okay, so I am seeing questions about Mightier. Okay, so let me see. So I will talk about it a little bit. So the Mightier program is basically, it's a biofeedback video game so like I explained, kids wear a heart rate monitor as they play, they see their emotions on the screen. The way it's set up is that so from the kids' experience, there is a world, like the Mightier world, the Mightier universe, where you collect characters, you earn rewards, you navigate, you like discover new worlds, right? So it's sort of like the meta game, like that whole like ecosystem there. And then there are a bunch of different mini games. There are actually like video games that kids might have experience with. Some games are more strategic, some games are fast paced. And so trying to build for a lot of different gameplay interests. So kids who are 6 and new to video games and need something that is like a softer introduction to video games, but we can also tie their heart rate to it, and they can play while also practicing emotional regulation skills. Or a 12-year-old who has more game experiences, needs something really fast-paced or more intense, right? So we have 27 different games within the Mightier world that let kids explore and sort of like find what fits them. Our age range, we recommend ages 6 to 14 for Mightier. That is largely based off of our study and who the games are built for. That is not to say a 5-year-old can't play with a little extra help from you, or that like a 20-year-old can't play. I think we have adults who play Mightier. We actually just did this pilot with military personnel who played it and were like, yeah, this thing is helpful for me. So I think for the older group, it's just going to be a matter of like, oh, okay, this probably isn't, this isn't the same as like the video games I'm used to, because I'm used to like an older type of content, but still could be very helpful, very useful. And the amount of playtime is, we base all of our recommendations off of our results, which are around 45 minutes of play a week. So this is not a ton of screen time necessarily. Families break that up however they want to, whatever makes sense for them. So a lot of families do like 3 15-minute play sessions a week. Some families do way more than that. And that's where we really, like, that's enough practice, right? That's a lot of good practice. What else can I tell you about Mightier? We have a parent app that lets you see your child's stats, their progress, gives you additional information. We have a lot of program resources, which are things that actually are free and accessible to you right now. If you go to our site, just mightier.com, and you go to our like families tab in the resources section, there's a lot of articles, a lot of activities that are just free to engage with, to use, to download. So you're welcome to all of that now or anytime as well, because a lot of it is really, hopefully helpful framing around emotions and behaviors. I have the question thing up, so let me see if there's anything else. Have you ever seen a child get more frustrated when the game isn't working in the cycle of increasing anger instead of them intentionally calming down to make the game work? That's a great question. So the game ramps up as kids go, meaning it is easier, the heart rate piece of this and how Mightier responds to you and to your heart rate and how your zones are set is easier when you start. We do this because we don't want kids who struggle with frustration tolerance, or kids who are used to being told that like anger is bad, you shouldn't feel angry. We don't want them having that sort of reaction where they're like, I don't like this game because it's making me feel bad about myself. So it's easier to start. We do that so kids can explore and sort of get the rhythm down, figure out how things work, start figuring out how to bring their heart rate down. And then as they progress, it starts ramping up. So we try to keep, well, our goal is that we keep up with kids as they get better and better at regulating and bringing their heart rate down. The challenge level increases with them. And it is truly built around like you're not punished for being in the red zone. That's like your goals are around bringing your heart rate down and earning rewards for that. But that being said, like there for sure have been times when some kids really do have a hard time with it, right? And that might either mean they need extra help or we need to adjust some settings on our end. So we do have a number of resources built out around that, how to think about that, how to set your child up for success. That's part of like the parent side of the program, like what you get at the beginning. But also we have a support team. We have our family care team who is pretty well trained in understanding like why a child might be reacting in a certain way, and then the adjustments we can make so that they have a good gameplay experience and can actually get the practice and get the skills that they need.